Okay. When you look at the title of the theme, it's quite obvious why I'm the first of the theme contact points to report, because we have the reporting units as one of the topics in our theme. The scope of the theme is quite lengthy, defined already in the directive, but basically it boils down to areas managed, regulated, or used for reporting, and that's why I think it's important for this workshop, at international, European, national, regional, and local levels. And then the Inspire Directive goes to some length, including a number of examples for these areas. And we will be hearing about quite a lot of them in more detail today. As you see, the scope is quite broad. So we have tried to structure the scope a little bit into two large parts. One is on management, restriction, and regulation, so any areas that are used for these purposes. And then, as a separate one, to look at the reporting units as well. So the first part we've covered by an application schema for management, restriction, or regulation zones. And the second one is covered by a number of requirements and recommendations that are made for reporting data, and I will go into more detail on this today. I will start with the reporting part because that is probably of more interest for you today, and also it explains or gives a good basis for the second part of the presentation. We've looked at the number of, let's say, more generic use cases in the thematic working group for area management, restriction, and regulation zones. There were basically two main questions that we wanted to support. One was to find in one given area all the management zones or the restrictions that apply if you want to do a certain activity in that area. So we want to find all zones of a certain type, all zones that have a specific identifier or a name, if we know that for one reason or another, or any kind of zone or restriction that are established under a certain, typically European legal obligation. And then the other way around, we want to find also to be able to find also all the zones and restrictions in a given geographic area. So I want to do something somewhere. I want to know everything that is being managed or restricted there, let's say from an environmental perspective in that area. For reporting units, it's a bit different, or it's related but a bit different. We basically want to provide a spatial reference for reporting data, or as I like to call it, to put reporting data on a map. So just to provide the spatial objects that you can attach to the reporting data, which is often existing in tables, in order to produce nice maps. That is the one thing. The other thing is obviously to, once you've put things in a GIS context, let's say, you also are able to perform spatial analysis, neighborhoods, overlaps, intersections, and so on. Reporting units has given us quite a few headaches in the thematic working groups, let's say, because there are so many different kinds of them. And what we've decided in the end, and that is also now available in the version 2.9 that you may have seen of the data specification, is that we don't have a specific data model or application schema for reporting units. And that is because we've seen that a lot of different spatial objects that are within different themes in Inspire are used as reporting units for different reporting obligations. So it could be, in many cases, management, restriction, or regulation zones, so any areas that are established for management, for example, air quality management zones, that are used as reporting units for the exceedance indicators. Then we also have reporting units as other spatial objects in other Inspire spatial data themes. We have administrative units, we have statistical units, environmental monitoring facilities, water courses, and the list goes on. And you will again hear about several examples of these in the other presentations today. So what we've done is we've tried to put an annex in the data specification that lists maybe not all, but at least all that we could get from the other thematic working groups, spatial objects that are used as reporting units for one or another environmental reporting obligation. So that is, I think, a very important part of the data specification if you get to look at it. We've also had some thoughts on how this reference can be done from reporting data to the inspired spatial objects, and we come to the question back that we had earlier about how to keep the consistency, especially about the life cycle of the different objects. One option that would be a very close integration would be to develop an Inspire-based data model for reporting, and I think we will see some example of that from Kati later today. There could also be looser references, for example, by just providing an Inspire ID, and I think also that we might see an example from the biodiversity domain later. And then there is, let's say, the loosest reference, which would be through a thematic identifier. That is to be avoided if possible, because we will get into all kinds of problems of uniqueness and persistence and also of life cycles potentially. So we've included basically 3 requirements and recommendations in the AM data specification. One is basically to say that the spatial objects that are used as reporting units should be dealt or should be delivered in Inspire as defined by the theme that contains the object. So we're not trying to interfere with whatever the theme on statistical units or administrative units says on how to provide that. The second one is really important, is that we require that all reporting data in the future that uses a spatial object that is within the scope of Inspire to provide a spatial reference for the reporting data should or shall include a reference to this Inspire spatial object. So we want to have a closer link between the reporting data and the Inspire spatial object that provide the spatial reference. And the reference could be, as I said before, either through the Inspire ID, through a thematic identifier, or even by providing an extension of an Inspire data model. And the third one is that in order to enable these references, each Inspire spatial object that is used as a reporting unit in one or another reporting obligation should have an Inspire ID so that it can be uniquely identified. This is just a list, or not a complete list, of the directives and reporting obligations that we had to look at. It's not complete, as I said, there's more actually, but just to give you an idea of what we had to look at. That was the part on reporting units. On area management, we basically looked at all the zones that have been established by a specific legal requirement to deliver some environmental objectives to protect environmental quality, protect plant, animal life, human health, and so on. We have a number of zone types identified that are a high-level classification of the management zones that we have. And I think we've been fairly complete, but in case there are other things that we've missed, it can also be extended to capture additional zone types if necessary. This is basically the whole data model. It's quite simplified in version 2.9. We basically have the main, just one data type in the middle with some IDs, thematic or Inspire identifiers. We have a description of the zone by its type through a name and the environmental domain it is being set up to be managed. And then we have a legal basis that basically says for what or by what legal obligation has this zone being set up. We have 2 main code lists that allow, let's say, the classification of the zones. One is the zone type. As I said, it's a high-level classification of the different types of management zones that we've identified. And then we have one on the environmental domain that is dealt with or addressed by the management area. Here's an example on how an extension of this model could be done. This is just an example for information where we've looked at an air quality management zone and just added a number of specific attributes that are relevant for that kind of domain-specific application. Just to be very clear, this is not part of any legal obligation, not anything that should go into the implementing rule. It's just something informative as an annex to show if a reporting group decides to implement an extension of Inspire, this is how it could be done. Just to show you a few more examples, this is how the data model would be used for a river basin district. You would have a zone type code, which is a river basin district from the main code list. You have a geographical name of that river basin district here. You have the name and the link to the legal act under which it has been established. In this case, it would be the Water Framework Directive, and that's basically it. Another example would be nitrate-vulnerable zones, where you have, again, the zone type nitrate-vulnerable zone. You have some thematic identifier, A and D3 in this case. And again, you would have a link to the directive that establishes that zone. In that case, the directive against the pollution caused by nitrates in agricultural sources. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much, and welcome any questions on this. Thanks.